Hi, welcome back. If you're new here, I recently scored a 710 on the GMAT, and I came from a very low baseline. I started off at 430, and I'm essentially just going to be running through how I actually got to that 710. Now, in this video, I'm going to be talking through an overall approach on how to get to a 710, and the logical phases, I believe, that are necessary in order to get there. So there are three total phases that I'll be talking through. The first is diagnosis, the second is the saturation phase, and the third is the fine-tuning and test-taking phase. So in the diagnosis phase, you're going to conduct an initial GMAT prep test. So take one from MBA.com, take an official test. You can do a few questions beforehand, but you don't want to be studying for a whole month and then take the test, because then it defeats the purpose of it. The intended purpose is to gauge where you're at, actually, and your baseline is essentially going to be your baseline. And then from that baseline, we can then determine how long it's roughly going to take you to get your high score. So if you score below 500, say sub 500 on the GMAT prep test, then I'd say you're going to need at least 6 months of solid study. And I'm assuming you're going to be doing at least part-time work during this, but most of you will be working full-time as well. If you score 500 plus, I'd say 2 months to 6 months max is needed. If you do it right. If you get a 600 plus, I'd say anywhere from 1 to 2 months. I've seen people get 100-point improvement in a month. I'm an example of that. In this phase, you're also going to be intending on developing a plan. You have to develop your plan, and you have to build habits of study. Just slowly build the habit of study. Now, to get into the habit of study, I highly recommend the Pomodoro method, which is essentially small chunks of study and productivity. It basically works on the premise that the brain only stays alert or active for 50 minutes. I should have remembered that before I created the last video. But it's the most effective way to study. So start getting into the habit of using Pomodoros during your study, and orient those Pomodoros around your existing life and work commitments. So I'm now going to be talking a bit through some of the resources I think you should go and grab before you get into everything, so you can plan accordingly based on what your diagnostic test dictated. So let's assume you've scored a 600 and you've only got 2 months, and you can do this in 2 months to get like a 700 plus score. So let's look at some of the resources I think you should use. Starting with quant, I believe you should only use Target Test Prep. It's the most comprehensive program for verbal. Until Target Test Prep have come out with their verbal material, which is great, by the way. It is really good stuff. I've had access to it through Marty. It really is going to be a game changer. I will be recommending some other resources to help you guys, and what I use actually to get my base and advanced concepts. So for sentence correction, I think that, look, I should take a step back. I think for sentence correction, if you're a non-native English speaker, you might want to consider eGMAT, because I think it's much better for non-natives. If you're born in America, or if you were taught, if you were heavily engraved in some sort of standardized test such as the SAT, then you might want to just look at Manhattan's sentence correction book, because you'll probably pick up on the concepts a bit easier. If you're from Australia or another English speaking country, maybe even the UK, I'm not too sure what they're taught in school there, but if you're from Australia, in all honesty, I recommend just getting Aristotle's SC Grower. It goes through the concepts really, really simply, and it also maps a whole bunch of OG questions to each concept. Now, for critical reasoning, I only recommend PowerScore's CR Bible. This is the be-all and end-all of CR. And lastly, for reading comp, it's a bit of a delicate one, so I'll come back to it. For these two resources I mentioned, for the SC and CR resources, what you're going to be doing is taking flashcards and notes. You're going to be taking little outlines and flashcards. So I'd also recommend getting into the habit of using Google Sheets or a program named Anki. Look it up. Anki has a higher learning curve, so it might take a bit of getting used to. So for reading comprehension, in all honesty, there's no silver bullet to this. People will only recommend what worked for them. I've tried a whole bunch of different techniques, and I guess I found that only a few methods worked. I recommend reading through Wiley's RC Grail. It's probably the only thing that talks about reading comprehension in a rational way. It just goes through everything. It's a really quick read. Get it on Kindle. I would caution on using the passages in the back of that book. I think some of them are broken. They just don't really work, and they're not very GMAT-like. So for RC, in all honesty, get into the habit of reading something you enjoy. For me, I read the book Outliers, and I was currently reading, I was reading Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow. Took me a second. I was reading that throughout my whole prep, so I found that helped a little bit. But I found the most beneficial thing for RC was simply just working on the passages. So if you look up my name on GMAT Club, you'll see that I literally typed out answers, and that's the Feynman technique, where you essentially explain each answer. So get into the habit of typing out why there are 4 incorrect answers, why each answer is incorrect. So A is incorrect, B is incorrect for this reason, because that's the only surefire thing that helped me improve an RC. You'll also want to grab one of these. This is what you do your tests on. You need to get used to it. It's a laminated plastic card, and buy a box of these. They're very expensive, but just buy it in bulk. They run out pretty quickly. These are the pens that you'll be using on the actual test. It's really important to get into the habit of using these right now. Like, it just becomes second nature. So once you transition from your study environment to the actual test center, it's really easy. It's like there's no difference. So people who tend to write on paper, like, you'll probably end up burning it through a whole tree anyway, the amount of questions you're going to be doing. So just keep this plastic card. The other thing I need to mention as well is you want to maintain an error log. You want to get your hands on an error log. Some people use Excel and they add all these analytics, which don't add value. Like, I would not waste your time on that. I would just go onto GMAT Club, create a user account, and use their integrated error log. The reason for that is GMAT Club literally has every question I've come across. Every question except for target test prep stuff. That's in their own platform, but then again, target test prep has their own integrated error log. So it does the analytics for you. So create an account, and when you get a question wrong, just flag it wrong on your GMAT Club. Like, look up the question, go to GMAT Club, flag it wrong. It'll be automatically recorded in your error log, and then you'll be able to do some analysis and figure out where you're getting them wrong. So phase 2. In phase 2 is going to be saturation. So in this phase, you're going to go through each of the material that you've gotten. You're going to go through subsection by subsection. And the way this is going to work is, when I say subsection, I mean CR is one subsection, and then SC is another. So you'll be working on multiple subsections at a time, but you'll only be working on one subcomponent from each subsection at a time. So I would be working on, say, weaken the argument questions, which is from critical reasoning, only when I was working, and then I'll be working on subject-verb agreement from sentence correction. So logically, what this is going to look like is you'll be doing a bit of content, and then you'll be doing a whole bunch of questions on that bit of content. Now, what you'll be doing in those questions is, if you're doing quant, you don't really need to worry about this. This is mainly for verbal. So for quant, literally just follow Target Test Prep's platform, because it mimics this logic in its platform by teaching you content and then getting you to do a whole bunch of tests. But for verbal, it's very different. What you'll be doing is reading up, say, a passage. Say you covered strengthen the argument questions in PowerScore's book. Now, don't progress on to any other content until you've worked on a whole bunch of questions. And the way you're going to work on those questions is you're going to start off at the sub 600 level. So you're going to go to GMAT Club and look up questions, use the search function, only use Manhattan, Veritas, or Official Guide. Prioritize them the other way around. So Official Guide is your priority, Manhattan, and then Veritas lastly. Like Manhattan and Veritas are roughly the same in terms of the quality of the questions, to be honest, but nothing mimics the logic of OG questions. So caution on the side of using third parties. Now, you use the search function, search for sub 600 questions, and keep working on those questions until you can get, say, a streak of 10 questions right consecutively. Do not move on to 600 level or 700 level until you've achieved that streak. This will force you to learn and execute properly. Now, what you need to do is, you'll break the streak. Like, if you get 10 questions right, if you get 9 questions right and then you're solving the 10th question, but you get that wrong, you have to repeat the whole streak. Like, this is a really brutal way to train, but it forces you to be very careful, and it also fleshes out a whole bunch of knowledge you don't know. So, say I get one question wrong, I look at that question and I learn, okay, well, for and but or fanboys is required to separate two independent clauses when a comma is required. So that's a new concept I need to learn. So for those errors that break your streaks, you're going to create flashcards or record them. People say record them in error log. Just get some sort of system. Google Sheets, that works perfectly. I used Anki. Anki is an excellent app, and you can also get it on your phone as well. So that came in handy because I was going everywhere, and you could look up all these errors that I gotten. Now, you'll find that you will not be able to achieve your streak until you've learnt what you need to learn. So get a streak of, say, 10 questions right for sub 600, maybe 15. Try for 15. Once you've achieved that, you lock it away, then you move on to 600 level. Do the same. Just it's slightly more difficult. Aim for 10 questions correct. Only move on once you've gotten those 10. You have enough questions to do this. And if you keep doing questions without actually going back and reviewing those little flashcards of the errors that you're picking up, you're not doing this properly, and you won't learn, you won't master, you won't move on. So keep doing that. This is the most effective way to master the content, and it's the most surefire way to translate the memory into your longer term memory and skill set. Because I can guarantee you it might take a few days for you to get through just a few of the concepts. So, like for example, I think I was working on weak in the argument 700 level streaks of questions for like 4 or 5 days. So Now this concept is something Marty from Target Test Prep, Marty Murray, he gave me. I won't talk to the nth degree on this concept. I think if you want to do that, you should probably get advice from Marty. Go speak to Marty. I'll put his details in this video. Because I'm only basically talking about it at a high level. He really engraved me into this method. Now, after you've achieved those streaks, as I said, like, you need to constantly refine. So I'd say 20% of your time is going to be spent on the actual learning, so actually going through the book. 60% of your time will be on achieving those streaks, because it'll be quite difficult and it's going to take a lot of time. So the other 20% of your time is going to be on the refinement. So using active learning methods to convert those errors and execution mistakes into longer term memory. Off the top of my head, I mentioned flashcards and the Feynman technique. So Feynman is the Feynman technique is essentially explaining a concept to a 5-year-old or someone who is visiting your planet who doesn't know anything about what you're doing. So if you write that out or if you type it up on, say, GMAT Club forums, it'll force your brain to sort of actively recall that information. And only active recall methods they're the only ones that engage your learning. They've been proven. I'll try and link a video, but it's been proven that those are the only effective forms of studying. Do not rewrite notes. That's the most inefficient way of studying. Do not read. Reading is another inefficient way of studying. Solving questions, flashcards, and the Feynman technique are the 3 techniques I used, and they worked. Also forgot to mention that when you go through phase 2, you do all of your questions untimed. No exception. No exception whatsoever. So do every single question, particularly when you're doing the streaks, do them untimed. Before getting into phase 3, I'm assuming that you've taken those 2 tests and that you've scored at least, say, high 500s and maybe 600s. Hopefully 600s by this stage, because the saturation phase is meant to be long. Now, in this phase, the refinement and test-taking phase, you're essentially going to be working on little bits of everything while focusing only on your weaknesses. So what I mean by that is you're going to try and introduce a method in which you can diagnose across everything. So perhaps take a 31 question custom test in Target Test Prep, or perhaps GMAT Club, or perhaps just do random questions, 31 questions across each quant and verbal, both quant and verbal. You're going to identify little weaknesses and you're going to work on those topics within that same day. Now, you'll find that every couple of days, some topics will dip down in terms of the strength, and some others will dip up, will improve. So I recommend a process of, say, day 1, diagnosing across everything, and then working on those weak points using your content, your Target Test Prep platform, to log in and work on those concepts, and then the next day diagnose again, and you'll likely see some shifting, some improvement, and keep repeating. Now, I'd recommend getting through maybe 4 or 5 cycles of this and then take another test. Now, when you take the tests, you're going to have to go through and pick up a timing strategy. I'll discuss timing strategies in another video because this video is going to already be too long. Thanks for watching. If you have any direct questions, email me on the email below this. Feel free to ask anything. I'm happy to respond. And just remember the 3 phases, okay?
I don't get it. You see, phase 1, collect underpants. Phase 2, phase 3, profit. Oh, I get it. No, you don't, fat ass.